I was hopelessly and helplessly addicted to pornography, for sure. Like watching it multiple times a day, very secretive, kind of that double life thing, still all the while going to church, thinking I was a Christian because I went to church.
The pivotal shift for me is finally coming to a place of surrender. I said the right things, I was memorizing scripture, all this stuff, but there was no surrender and no real trust for God in my heart at all until the age of 23 when I came to genuine faith.
Because I just found it so much easier and honestly more gratifying to just live in the world of pornography. I didn't have to interact with a real woman at all.
I feel like my mom is the one that really pounded on heaven for me, and my dad certainly was a prayer as well, but my mom especially.
When I read Psalm 14 that day, something changed in my heart, and the only way I can think to explain it is that I finally saw pornography the way God saw it, and I hated it the way that He hated it. And I just got this revulsion for pornography that has stuck with me to this day. And the day I got saved was the last day I ever watched pornography. I have had literally no interest since then.
I've never heard that. What I've heard is, oh my gosh, I opened Pandora's box. I had no idea. I was more addicted as a Christian than I was before because I opened that door back up and I kind of treated lightly the grace of God in the way that He delivered me so powerfully.
And so I knew that from like day one coming to Christ, that like what I did with my body mattered to God, sexuality mattered to God. I knew that was like you're treading on holy ground. I wanted to start reaching out to the gay community more intentionally. And so the first thing we did was we went to a pride parade. It was fantastic. I had a lot of great conversations, able to have very explicit gospel conversations with people.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're glad that you've joined us. And whether you're coming to us through Love and Truth Network directly or through Transforming Congregations, I hope that this episode is something that you'll find to be really instructive and helpful. We have with us today one of my friends that I've known for quite some time. We just were introduced many years ago down in New York City and through another mutual friend, and we've just maintained our connection. And Ryan has just been involved in lots and lots of ministry, street ministry, ministry in bars, ministry just in the heart of New York City. And I'll let him unpack his story for you. But Ryan, we're so glad that you're here. Great to reconnect with you as well. Yeah, thank you. Well, we would love for you to just kind of start off this episode by sharing God's work in your life, how what kind of family you grew up in, that kind of stuff, how you came to know Christ, and what life has been like, afterward as well.
Yeah, so I grew up for the most part going to church. My dad, my mom and dad had kind of always been going to church. I think when I was first, born and a little kid, they were more nominally Christian. I think they would even acknowledge that. My dad, in fact, was a ardent atheist for a long time. He's a scientist and whatnot, and ended up coming to faith while serving at this church that he was at with my mom. But anyway, yeah. So church world was very much something I was familiar with growing up. Prayed the sinner's prayer when I was 5 years old. All that type of stuff didn't mean anything to me or anything. Didn't know what I was doing, but just all the standard stuff as a kid, going to church and whatnot. So church was always part of my life for sure. But I did not know God, like in the most simple terms. Yeah. I lived like a demon up until Jesus interrupted my life when I was 19 years old in college when I got saved. So I know that you deal a lot with people, and your ministry revolves a lot around just sexual brokenness and sexual healing in the church, and that's a big part of my story. I don't know how I was first exposed to pornography. I don't really remember exactly, like the first time I saw it or anything like that. But I definitely know that by the time I was in high school, I was hopelessly and helplessly addicted to pornography, for sure. Like watching it multiple times a day, very secretive, kind of that double life thing, still all the while going to church, thinking I was a Christian because I went to church and, knew basic Christian stuff, but didn't take any of it super seriously. Just kind of thought I was a Christian because I was surrounded by Christian things. And it wasn't until I went off to college and got out from under my parents' roof that I made a more self-conscious rejection of Christianity my first year of college. And for my whole freshman year, I was a self-professing atheist. And I ended up getting into pretty dark places before the Lord saved me. But my porn addiction was very much connected to just general depression, general lack of self-esteem. I had gone through some rough stuff as a kid that definitely impacted the way I thought of myself, didn't like myself very much, didn't feel like anyone was, thought much of me, just like, kind of just general low self-esteem, and found I guess, in some very warped, twisted, and perverted way, comfort in pornography. It was definitely like a way of finding some sense of joy or happiness.
I think a lot of people actually would agree in terms of finding some kind of comfort in pornography or some kind of. We talk a lot about in the ministry about how pornography and sexual sin is the greatest counterfeit for authentic intimacy. And so whether it's comfort, whether it's escape, what have you, it does become, for so many, it's so much more than just the sexual urge or lust or whatever. Of course, that's involved. But one of the things that I wanted to back up for a moment, if we could, Ryan, you talked about going through some rough stuff as a kid. What was that primarily in peer relationships, or was that in some other kind of format, I guess?
So I think it's a good question. It probably started with directly in the home family stuff. So my dad ended up coming to faith through some turmoil in the home where they had some major financial issues. My dad tried to start a company, and I don't know all the details of this, tried to start a company. It didn't really work out. There was a lot of, kind of financial problems with the home. My mom and dad got into a lot of debt and stuff, and caused a lot of stress. My mom was working a lot. There was definitely they went through a very rough patch in their marriage. And that was sort of how my dad ended up coming to Christ, was through all of that turmoil. So the Lord certainly redeemed it. But I know that it had a pretty rough impact on me, watching my parents argue a lot, times when they would, sometimes lash out at me. And I think that there was something that happened to me where it was this internalized sort of, I don't know what the word is, just self-deprecation that I had.
Sure.
Just very down all the time. Just like I said earlier, just very depressed. And it's funny, you talked about pornography being counterfeit intimacy. It's so true, because one of the things I realized looking back on all this is that once I got into puberty and discovered women, I started realizing I was lusting after the approval of women. There was something I wanted to make me feel significant. I wanted women to esteem me. And that was very much tangled up with the newfound sexual desires as a teenager and that sort of thing, in wanting to be with a woman who admired me to make me feel significant, right? So looking kind of for romantic relationship to be sort of that vine that gave me life. Jesus talks about how he's the true vine.
Yes.
Well, a false vine that I was clinging to for life was that desire for romantic intimacy and to feel significant because of a woman esteeming me specifically. And the funny thing about that is, because I was kind of a depressed kid, didn't have a ton of self-confidence, I never had the self-confidence to interact with women really. So I didn't really have a serious girlfriend or anything like that, but just got lost in the world of pornography.
But it feels the fantasy. Especially when you can't, when you're so self-conscious and nervous about even engaging in any kind of conversation, or even taking a risk in some way of talking with a girl or engaging with a girl, then it all gets funneled into kind of this background closed door fantasy life.
Yeah. And there were some girls that I dated briefly on and off, never anything super serious in high school. because I just found it so much easier and honestly more gratifying to just live in the world of pornography. I didn't have to interact with a real woman at all. And, again, your fantasies don't disappoint you, right? And so you don't have to deal with the difficult things of real life. You just live in your fantasy world. And I very much developed this just life in my head fantasy world that turned into constant just sexual lust that was just all consuming at all times. And like I said, it got to a point where I was watching pornography multiple times a day, every day. There was not a single day that went by that I did not watch some form of pornography for like the latter part of my high school life. But that obviously didn't cure anything either. I was depressed, and I know that in conversations I've had with my parents more recently, like, they've talked about how, like, yeah, we knew that, like, when you were in high school, like, you were going through some stuff and, like, you weren't very happy and there were, like, issues and whatnot. So, yeah, it didn't heal anything at all. And, there were some times in high school when I sort of flirted, not seriously, but flirted with the idea of suicide. But it wasn't super serious. It wasn't until I got to college and made more of a self-conscious rejection of my Christian upbringing. And this is another thing, let me back up a little bit. There was so much twistedness and deception in that I just thought I was a Christian because I was around Christian things, but obviously had like no interest in living a godly life, like at all. And it wasn't just the pornography. Like I was super disrespectful to my parents. I was very rebellious, angry, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness that just roiled in my heart towards people in general. Just like in no way concerned with who God was and what it meant to walk in his ways at all. So looking back on it, I know like I was obviously deceived, obviously not a Christian. I know the Lord now, and I know the difference between knowing God and not knowing God. Right?
So do I.
Yeah. And so, but there was something that took place kind of like as I consciously rejected my Christian faith, became an atheist, and not a intellectual atheist where I like really had a thought through atheism. It was more of the kind of disgruntled, angsty teenager atheist kind of person where I'm just kind of angry at the world. And so I just want to like, just be an atheist kind of thing. Right. But one of the things that I really struggled with as an atheist was the question. I struggled with this prior to going to college too, but I really struggled with the question of meaning and significance. I never really felt like anything I did had a lot of meaning to it because I didn't have like an eternal paradigm to put anything in. And so I would always like think, those thoughts of like, well, I'm going to die. So what's the point, right? Like, what's the point of, this or that, or doing this, or pursuing this dream, or pursuing this hobby? Like, I'm just going to die. So like, ultimately what actually really matters? And that only got worse, and that drove a lot more despair in me, and kind of a nihilism of just kind of thinking like, nothing actually really matters. I really kind of took atheism to its conclusions that like you can kind of make yourself feel good by telling you things matter to you, but it's like ultimately once I die, it's like I didn't really do anything that ultimately had any significance. So significance and meaning was something that I really chased after, didn't feel like I could find because I didn't know God. And that drove the despair even deeper. I mean, like, we are made to have meaning and to feel purpose and to feel significant. And when you don't have a basis to feel any of that, like, that wrecks you. So that right. Did not, that really messed me up, thinking about a godless existence. And it was the summer between my freshman year and sophomore year of college, I was working in Michigan, and this was how I ended up getting saved, is that I was working in Michigan just at like a country club as a prep cook, and lived in like this house kind of in the woods where they had like the staff housing and employee housing. And northern Michigan's beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been there, but northern Michigan's gorgeous in the summertime. And I was going on a run, and I was standing at the top of this hill kind of overlooking a prairie. You could see Lake Michigan in the background. And I just remember having this kind of moment where I realized creation has an impact on me. Like, I'm standing here looking out over this beautiful landscape. Why am I in awe of this? And I was thinking about it as an atheist, like, I don't really understand why nature elicits this like reflective mindset or this, why nature prompts me to ask existential questions. Why is it that when I look at creation, I start thinking big thoughts, and start wondering about myself and my place in the universe? Like, why does nature do that to me? And I couldn't really, it just didn't seem to make sense to me.
Romans 1 didn't come to mind immediately as an atheist, probably.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Romans 1 didn't come immediately to mind as an atheist, right?
No, it did not. And so I just remember having this like very serious moment where I was standing there and just thinking to myself, like, my atheism doesn't feel like it makes sense just in my experience. I'm obviously not happy. I want to feel purpose. There is no purpose. Nature makes me want something greater than myself. This doesn't really make sense, right? And I was also sort of at the height of some of my depression that summer and had really started to take the idea of suicide very seriously because, again, I just didn't feel like anything really mattered, and I was just kind of an angry, bitter teenager. And so I remember having this like very logical discussion with myself on the hill that day, and I remember thinking, if I'm going to kill myself, I should probably exhaust all my options first before doing that. And I remember, like, in that moment, this was the thought that really stuck with me. That I had always gone to church. People told me Jesus makes you happy, Jesus gives you purpose, Jesus brings fulfillment. I thought it was all just trash. I thought it was stupid. Yeah. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I went to church. I never like really gave God a fair chance, though. I like never surrendered myself to God. And if there was anything I learned in church, it's that you're supposed to surrender your life to Christ, right? And just kind of being affiliated with him doesn't necessarily matter. And so I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, like I should probably like check out this God thing more, right? And so I ended up going back to the place I was staying, ran back there, and for some reason I had a Bible with me. I mean, in retrospect, it's just God's providence, but like I had a Bible with me that I brought with me that summer. I don't know why, but I remember going back to my room. Nobody was there. Going back to my room, I opened up my Bible. And without knowing like where to turn, it's not like I was a student of the scriptures or something, right? I didn't know where to go. I was like, I'll just open it up and just start reading some stuff. I opened it up, and the first thing I open up to, and the first thing my eyes see on the page was Psalm 14, verse 1. Do you know what Psalm 14:1 says?
Not off the top of my head, no.
It says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, their deeds are vile, and there are none who do good." And when I read that, it was like just a cannonball hit my chest, because it just like, that verse was talking about me. Like in every single way, it was talking about me, because I was an atheist. I said there was no God. That verse said I was a fool. And like that hit me as true, because I realized like, obviously this atheism thing isn't solving my problems. I'm still a mess.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm a fool. But then it goes on to say that their deeds are corrupt and they're no good. And I was like, that's also true about me. Like that is literally describing who I am, because I knew that not only was I like a porn addict, but I knew that I had hurt other people. I was no good for anyone around me. Like I didn't bring anything positive. Like I was just a bad guy, And so I just found that verse to be describing me so perfectly. And it was the first time in my life I ever actually experienced the conviction of sin. First and foremost, the sin of my atheism. And secondly, like, the first part of that verse is, that you're a fool if you say there's no God. But then when it talks about your deeds being wicked, the first thing that came to mind when I read that was not my lying or, any other type of sin. It was my porn. Like, that was the thing that God highlighted when I read that verse, was my porn addiction. It certainly wasn't my only problem or my only sin for that matter, but it was like the one that God highlighted there. And like I said, it was an experience of the conviction of the Holy Spirit where I knew I was a sinner. Like I was the problem. I couldn't point my fingers at my parents. I couldn't point my fingers at, other people who bullied me when I was a kid. I couldn't point my finger at anyone else. I was guilty. I was condemned. I was a sinner. And I had gone to church enough to know that if you're a sinner, Jesus died to save you, right? And so just in my room that day, I prayed like a very simple prayer of just like, Jesus, I'm clearly screwing my life up. I want to follow you. I want you. And I would not have been able to say this or understood this at the time, but looking back with a little bit more like, biblical literacy now, I know that is when I was born again. Like something changed in my heart. I didn't want my sin. I wanted Jesus. So that is how God saved me. But the interesting about that, particularly that kind of leads to some of the other ministry stuff, was that when that happened and the sin that God dealt with me on was my pornography, there was something that shifted in my heart when I read Psalm 14:1 and thought about pornography, because I always knew that porn was like bad. I always knew that it was like degrading to women, and that's not something I should be doing, and that's why I was always really secretive about it, and it was a shameful thing. Like, I just knew that it was not a good, healthy thing to be doing. But I didn't really care. But when I read Psalm 14 that day, something changed in my heart, and the only way I can think to explain it is that I finally saw pornography the way God saw it, and I hated it the way that He hated it. And I just got this revulsion for pornography that has stuck with me to this day. And the day I got saved was the last day I ever watched pornography. I have had literally no interest since then. It was just this total change of heart where all the taste for it was gone. And I just hated it with like a perfect righteous hatred. I saw it as sin, and I didn't want anything to do with it, didn't want to be associated with it again. Yeah. And so there was this sort of immediate, just, again, revulsion is the only word I can think for it. I just didn't want it. Yep. I literally, any interest in it was just like, boom, gone. I'm not interested in that anymore.
So I would love to chat with you about that for a minute before you go on with your story. But I also want to back up and talk about something else that you touched on. And I know I've mentioned this in some other podcasts, but I grew up in cultural Christianity for sure. I think there is such a thing as genuine. There are genuine Christians in probably every church, but I think there's also, or most churches, but I think there's also a lot of people who are going through the motions and are just so familiar with the image and the appearance of Christianity that they've adopted kind of they've adopted this as a cultural thing that they know is good to do, but there's no real relationship with God. And the word that you use that I also used, like it was the pivotal shift for me, is finally coming to a place of surrender. I mean, again, I'd prayed the sinner's prayer. I had multiple times when I was a kid, and a teenager, I said the right things. I was memorizing scripture, all this stuff, but there was no surrender and no real trust for God in my heart at all, until the age of 23, when I came to genuine faith. And so I'm wondering about if you can maybe if you care to comment about one of the things that I see a lot of times with parents that are raising children in the church. Oftentimes, when those children become adults, many times they just leave the faith entirely, or but I don't think they were. In most cases, they weren't even in the faith to begin with. But and there's also situations where people may seem to leave their faith, may go through seasons of rebellion, getting out from under their parents' thumb and out of the house or whatever. But then they come back, to something that they actually genuinely did have. But I think there are a lot of adult children who their parents are going back and saying, well, when they were 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, they prayed the prayer. And so I know that they're good. I know that they're fine. But the rest of their life, I mean, they just live like hell. I mean, they have no interest in spiritual things whatsoever, at least not godly things. And again, this was true for me as well. And you're saying it was true for you. I think that those parents, rather than holding on to some stringing of the right words together in a prayer, they need to really be praying for the genuine salvation of their children, rather than just hoping that, I think it happened, but there's no evidence of it. There's no root, there's no fruit. What are your thoughts about that, Ryan?
So many thoughts. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because theologically, the reason I'm a Christian today is because of God's sovereign grace, right? But practically, why am I a Christian today? Nobody was there to share the gospel with me. There was no evangelist there. But one thing I do know, as I look back on my life story, I had a parents, and specifically a dad, who prayed nonstop. So I have these funny memories as a kid, because when my dad got saved, he became a man of prayer, like an intercessor, like immediately. He just loved prayer. He started waking up super early in the morning, would just pray for hours. Like it was crazy. Like I saw that change in him. And I have distinct memories as a kid waking up in the middle of the night or really early in the morning to some sound in my room, and I would wake up and look over, and my dad would be sitting in the corner praying for me, just like at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or something like that, right? And he would always pray for me, even when he knew I was lost. He knew that I was disturbed. He knew there were issues. And, my parents did like tried to speak into my life. I had very much closed ears, wasn't really interested in hearing what they had to say. My dad had tried to talk to me about pornography, wasn't really interested, and he did a good job with it too. Like, he didn't blow up at me, wasn't angry about it. He tried to have calm, cool conversations about it. He had found it on my computer a few times. Like, he knew I was watching it. But he was just gracious, loving, and just kept praying. I know my mom always kept praying for me too. I just, as a teenager, didn't have ears to hear anything they wanted to say to me.
Yep.
But they just kept praying. And so I'm really glad.
Well, and so I just want to underscore that with you, that, I feel like my mom is the one that really, pounded on heaven for me. And my dad certainly was a prayer as well, but my mom especially. But man, whether it's a mom or a dad, or ideally both, there is something, I could hardly keep the tears back when you're talking about, waking up and finding your dad in the corner of your room praying for you. What an amazing gift that your father gave.
And that wasn't like a one-time thing. That happened many times. And I think my sister has memory of that too, of the same thing. And so, I'm convinced that practically it was the prayers of my parents, probably specifically of my dad, praying me into the kingdom, even when I was very, very lost, And it's interesting too, because when I got saved, I didn't have like a church I was attending. And for the first few years of my Christian walk, it was kind of just me and my Bible in a lot of ways, because I didn't know how to find a good church when I was away at college. But I had like the example of people like my dad or other people at my church, where when I came to Jesus, I knew that two things mattered: prayer and the Bible. I was like, I've got to pray and I've got to study the word. Like, that was all that I knew. And it was because of those examples of those saints, both my parents, but then also the people at the church that they had attended, where I just knew that that's what Christians did. And that was how Christians matured in their faith, was through prayer and the study of the word and that sort of thing. It's obviously more to it, but I knew those things were absolutely indispensable.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and so I've interrupted you several times, but I wanted to underscore a couple of things you were saying. But the other piece, just kind of pick up with what you're talking about in terms of once you came to faith, then, what happened from there?
Yeah. So there was that immediate change. Didn't want porn anymore. Day I got saved was the last day I ever watched pornography. That was 2000.
Okay, sorry, I got to interrupt you one more time. Yeah, sorry. So for many people listening to this, the ones that aren't saying, Gary, shut up and let Ryan talk, but for the peeps, many of the people listening to this, when they hear something like, man, like this was a massive addiction, multiple times a day, just consumed my life, et cetera, et cetera. I came to faith and boom, it was done. I've not looked at porn since. Like, for many, many Christians, that has not been their story. Like, what I also find though to be interesting is that I've talked to a number of guys who said they had an experience like that. Now, this isn't not true for everyone, but they had an experience like, man, it was broken. The power of it was broken. And something in the ease in which it was broken by the grace of God, when temptation came, they avoided it. But when some strong temptation came and they kind of thought, it wasn't a big deal kind of getting out of this in the end. And they started dabbling with it again. Well, what I've heard over and over and over again, I've never heard anybody say, yeah, I turned back to something God delivered me from: drugs, alcohol, pornography, et cetera. I turned back to something he delivered me from, and I dabbled in it, played around with it for a while, and then quit pretty easily. That I've never heard that. What I've heard is, oh my gosh, I opened Pandora's box. I had no idea. I was more addicted as a Christian than I was before, because I opened that door back up and I kind of treated lightly the grace of God in the way that he delivered me so powerfully. So for those that have had a struggle, even as a Christian, and failure in this area, or those that have gone back and have really understood, wow, I wish that I had kept that door shut. What are your thoughts? What comes to you after those folks?
I know that my experience was unique, and that has nothing to do with me. It's just the way God worked in that moment. But the other thing that's more important, so I stopped watching porn immediately. I stopped dabbling with other sexual sins, right?
Yeah, great point.
So this is the important thing to get into, is that a lot of people will think like, oh, he was just done. He just never had lust anymore, never masturbated anymore, or something like that, right? And it's like, no, that's not true. So, the porn addiction was instantaneous. Can't explain it, just other than what I already said. But I was still masturbating on an almost daily basis after that. I was still involved with some inappropriate relationships with girls, even after getting saved. It took a few years before I figured out, like, oh yeah, like I probably shouldn't be doing that with girls, right? Like, took a long time before I was able to kind of break the habit of masturbation, right? Where that's not like a part of my life. And then lust, I don't think any man's ever delivered from lust, right? I think we just grow in being more disciplined with our eyes and our mind and that sort of thing. So there was a long process of growth that had to take place. And even though porn was out of my life and just had no interest in that, the rest of my years of college, there was all sorts of other sins and temptations that I was dealing with and wrestling with and trying to figure out and confused about and whatnot. But I think that my conversion instilled one thing in me, is that God really cared about sex, and God really cared about sexual purity, sexual ethics. And so I knew that from like day one coming to Christ, that like what I did with my body mattered to God, sexuality mattered to God. I knew that was like you're treading on holy ground when you start talking about that stuff. Like it's not like flippant. It's not something that God's indifferent about. He cares about these things. And I think that one of the things that blessed me a lot, because I said I didn't have a church I was a part of, didn't have any sort of like discipleship group necessarily. It was really, for the first like 2 years of my Christian life, was kind of like me and my Bible. And there were some churches I went to and I don't think that's good, by the way. I think that we need to be plugged into churches, and that's only because Jesus is a faithful shepherd that he didn't let me, fall back to the wolves or anything.
Yeah, right.
But there were like some churches I attended, but just didn't really know what to look for in a church necessarily, right? And so one of the things that blessed me in my first like 2 years of being a Christian, before I found a good church to go to, was realizing how much the Bible talked about sex, and how much the Bible actually said about sexual sin and the creation of man and woman and God's intention for marriage and all that stuff. And so I had this moment where I realized, like, wait a second, like when I read the Bible, I'm getting my Creator's thoughts on my sexuality and like on what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and why I'm a gendered creature to begin with and what marriage is all about. And oh my gosh, this is about the gospel. And like, this is representative of Christ and his church. And like all those things were like, whoa, like the Bible teaches me about this stuff. Yes. And so I just became obsessed with studying what Scripture said about these things, mostly out of my own personal need. Because again, even though porn was gone right away, I still couldn't handle myself if an attractive woman walked in front of me. It's not like my whole heart was fully renovated or something like that. And so I just dove into the Word, and that was such a blessing to me. And I think one of the things that also really helped was recognizing where, I think it's in 1 Thessalonians 4, when Paul talks about how we're supposed to control ourselves not like the heathens who do not know God. That passage struck me because what that told me is that our sexual purity is primarily rooted in our knowledge of God. Like that, and so it's not just learn the do's and don'ts of what Christian sexual ethics are and just try your darndest to kind of follow the rules.
Yes.
But like it's about knowing God, and in knowing God and relating to God as one of his creatures, you learn how he intended you to walk, right? And how he intended you to live as a gendered creature, as a male or as a female, right? And so that was, again, paradigm shifting for me. That passage was really helpful in realizing that learning to walk in sexual purity is primarily about learning to know who God is and walk in intimacy with the Lord, and then letting him kind of flush all of that out in his own fatherly way as he loves you and shepherds. Wow. It's like in a really silly way, all I'm trying to say is like Scripture is sufficient. And I'm not saying, I know that it's way more complicated than just like read your Bible every day. It's not like that's just a magic trick or something, but the Lord meets us when we open ourselves to study his truth and apply these things and to be renewed in our mind so that we can, think God's thoughts after him, and then, let his ways become our ways. So, the rest of my years in college was just a lot of reading the word, being in prayer, and just asking God to teach me what it means to be a man, to be honest, because I obviously had no idea.
Yeah. Well, so jumping a little bit forward, how did you wind up in New York City?
Yeah, so this goes back to the whole significance thing. One of the things that also blessed me as I studied the Word was I finally figured out what everything exists for. It was Ephesians 3. I don't remember the verse off the top of my head, but where Paul talks about how God is accomplishing his eternal purposes in Jesus Christ. Those eternal purposes being the exaltation of his Son through the preaching of the gospel in every tribe, tongue, and nation. The Great Commission, right? That's what eternity is all about. It's bringing the nations around the throne of Christ to worship him through the gospel. And when I started to realize that, God had, there's actually purpose in everything. God intended to glorify his Son in all things. I started getting really interested in missions and evangelism, and wanted my life to align with God's eternal purposes. Because if his purposes are to exalt his name through the saving and sanctifying of sinners, I want to be part of that. I don't want my life to have no eternal purpose and just live for myself. I want to live for what God is doing in history. And so that was also very paradigm shifting for me in just the way I looked at life and the world. And so I wanted to be involved in missions. I wanted to do evangelism. I wanted to preach the gospel. And so I found a missions organization in New York City called Street Life Ministries, which is no longer there. They've relocated recently in the past year or so. But so I moved there right after college to join that ministry. And it was a ministry that did a lot of street evangelism, a lot of homeless ministry. We went to Brazil every year to work with women in the brothels. Just a lot of stuff. We worked with women in the massage parlors in Queens, where there's a lot of Chinese and Korean immigrants, women who are sex trafficked through the massage parlors and used as prostitutes oftentimes. So a lot of it was just an organization where the leaders were very much geared towards reaching out to people who are not typically hearing the gospel, right? And that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do. Yep. So when I heard about that ministry through some other connections, I spoke with the guy who was in charge of it a few times, and then moved to New York City. Literally, I think it was a week or 2 weeks after I graduated college. Wow. Moved there and didn't intend to do it long term, but ended up being there for 5 years. So yeah, and that was
I think quite a stint.
Yeah, 2013 was when I moved there, summer of 2013. And then I served there through end of 2018. So 5.5 years, something like that.
Okay. And that was during the time I was still living in upstate New York at the time where I grew up, but I had moved all over the country before then and moved back to that area. And at that time, I was just kind of leaving my role as a pastor for 12 years at a church in upstate New York and on a pastoral team. And got connected with, I don't remember how the connection was first made, but with one of your counterparts there, Jessica, and then somehow, anyway, we the three of us sat down at a restaurant in, I think it was Queens actually, and met. I remember. Yeah. One thing kind of led to another, and you guys were doing ministry and wanting to kind of grow. You were actually doing some work in gay bars even, and trying to build friendships and to really evangelize. And you were going in not by yourselves, but you're going in together. It was a teamwork, and also none of you came out of that particular area of struggle yourselves. And so I just thought that was, and I think you were kind of meeting with me in a sense to get some thoughts and ideas about what can we kind of look out for? How can we kind of approach people in a sense? And anyway, you were already doing some of that work, but that's how we got connected. And then there were other times that I came down to New York City, did a lot of ministry there, connected with you quite a bit down there. But talk about that stint of your life, because there's a lot that happened in those 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Well, there were some crazy years, really great years. So when I moved there to New York City, I wanted to do evangelism generally, but this was also, again, I said it was 2013. So the kind of the gay marriage debate had always been brewing, but had become more of a big deal, like in the broader culture, and like media starting to talk about it more on the news and stuff, because the Obergefell thing was coming up. And I think that was in 2015, if I remember correctly.
2015, June.
Right.
Yes.
So I didn't mention this. I'm originally from rural Illinois. I grew up like basically surrounded by cornfields. So very small town of like 7,000 people, something like that. And so homosexuality was something nobody ever talked about or anything like that. When I moved to New York City, though, I started doing homeless ministry and street evangelism, met transgender people, met people who were gay. What do I do with that? I had like never encountered that before or anything. And so it was a couple things. It was a combination of meeting people who were LGBTQ for the first time in my life and being like, oh, never thought about this stuff before, right? And then also the kind of the growing conversation around sexuality, homosexuality, gay marriage, that sort of stuff, and needing to be like, oh, what do I think about this? And then also meeting Jessica, because she was a staff member at the same ministry who had a loved one who I think had struggled with same-sex attraction. And so she was way ahead of the curve on this stuff. You know, she was reading Joe Dallas before I ever moved to New York City. So she had already thought through a lot of these things, had a heart for people who were struggling with this because she knew some people who did, and was someone who prayed regularly for the gay community. And it was like a combination of all of those things, and hearing Jessica's heart of concern and compassion for them. And then also realizing that just from like an apologetic standpoint, and just as a Christian living in America, I needed to think through what I believed about homosexuality. And then combine all of that with my heart for evangelism, all the dots just started connecting of like, okay, I want to share the gospel with these people, right? And that was very much Jessica's heart as well. And I think what I started to notice, the more I looked into everything, is that for decades, ever since the gay rights movement started, especially with like the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s, that there had been this wall sort of between the church and the gay community, and not much good interaction, or and definitely not much good communication between the two groups, if that makes sense. That was sort of my perception. And so, I just wanted to go where people weren't hearing the gospel and tell them about the gospel. Like, to me, it was really that simple. Like, that's just what evangelists do. That's what missionaries do. Jessica had the same heart. We had another really good friend named Akila, who also, I think, had, if I remember correctly, had someone that she knew, either whether a loved one or a friend, I don't remember, who struggled with same-sex attraction. So again, was already ahead of the curve with this stuff. And so, we started talking with the leadership at our ministry about wanting to, this was really Jessica's vision, and I just kind of jumped on board with it. So she was really the visionary with it, but wanted to start reaching out to the gay community more intentionally. And so the first thing we did was we went to a pride parade. I think 2014 or 15 was our first pride parade. I don't remember which year it was. So we did that. It was fantastic. Had a lot of great conversations, able to have very explicit gospel conversations with people. Our method was very laid back, very simple. We just took surveys that had questions about people's opinions on sexuality, went out there, asked people those questions, and then just used that as a conversation starter to kind of bring it back to the gospel and whatnot. So very laid back approach. We weren't preaching or yelling at people or anything. Some really great conversations. I was amazed at just how many doors God opened when we went out there. We had a group of maybe like 10 people, small group of people, but had tons of great interaction, shared the gospel with a lot of people that day, had really great combos. So we did the Pride Parade, and I can't remember if we had done 2 years of Pride Parades, because this is a long time ago now, my memory is bad, but either after one parade or after the second parade, we realized, like, okay, we need to do this more. We need something more consistent than just an annual Pride Parade. And that's when we started praying about maybe going to the gay bars, right, in Manhattan. And I think it started with, we started doing a prayer meeting every week, specifically just for the gay community and for transgender, just LGBTQ stuff. We just prayed for like 2 hours once a week. Me, Jessica, and a few other people on our staff got together and just prayed for this and just asked God for guidance. What do you want us to do? Bring revival, all that jazz. And so I think it was Jessica eventually who one night when she was praying just by herself, like just had this overcoming urge of like saying, God, send me into the gay bars, like just put me in that place. And when she told me that, I was like, yeah, sign me up. Let's go. So again, I can't take credit for this. She really was kind of more of the visionary for a lot of these things, and I was just fully on board with all of it. And so I think it was 2016, January of 2016, if I remember correctly, that we went to the bars for the first time. And we went to the gay bars once a month for about 2.5 years until I left in 2018. There might have been some months where we
wrote a book that talks about some of those experiences, right?
Yes. I knew you wanted to mention it. I have it right here.
Yeah, I do. So put that over in front of your face for a moment.
Yeah, sorry,
the gospel in gay bars. Yes.
Yeah, the gospel in the gay bars. That's it. Yeah. So it's on Amazon if anyone wants to hear more details and stuff. But so we went pretty consistently, like I said, probably once a month for about 2.5 years. And this is one of the things that blows my mind every time I think back about this, is that the message you'll get from the world is that Christians can't have these conversations with people who are gay or transgender. That's not allowed. You're not allowed to go talk to gay people about the gospel. And that's crap. That's not true at all. God will open these doors. Yes. God will open these doors because God wants to save sinners, right?
Yes.
And so like God wants Christians having these conversations with people. That is God's heart. He will open that door. And if we commit ourselves just running into the darkness where God wants to be, he'll open those doors so that you can shine your light. And so literally, I'm not even joking when I say this is not an exaggeration. I don't think there was a single time we went to the bars where we did not have some substantive conversation with somebody about the gospel or about God generally, right? It wasn't always like a full out gospel presentation or something, but it was like every single time we went, we had a meaningful discussion with someone about either Jesus, the gospel, God, or sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes all of them in one conversation.
Yeah, right.
Because they're all related. And so kind of our approach was we would just go to the bars and really more so with the heart of making friends, not necessarily trying to make converts, but just like we want to go, we want to talk to people, we want to meet people and hang out with them. And just in the context of that, God will open the door, right? And so we would just go and, sit down, look for people who are maybe, not hanging out with a large crowd or something, and just go ask them if they wanted to sit with us and have a drink. And they would. And we would just talk like normal people and just talk about life. And,
yes.
It was funny. I always joke that because of my time going to the gay bars, I've been hit on by more men than women in my life now. Because I also think every single time I went to the bars, somebody hit on me somehow. And so I would always be like, oh, no, I'm not gay. And then, not getting like defensive or angry, but just like letting them know, like, oh, no, it's okay. Like, I'm not gay. And they would be like, you know where you are? Like, why are you here?
Right.
And then I'd be like, well, why don't I tell you why I'm here? And the opener I would usually use is I would just tell people like, look, I'd just be transparent. I'd say like, look, I'm a Christian, and I've noticed there's not a lot of good communication between Christians and people in the LGBT community. And I'm honestly here to meet people and hear your story. Do you mind telling me your life story?
What a non-threatening.
Nobody ever said no to me. I would be that plain with them, and nobody ever said no to me. They would always be engaged and want to talk. And that's what I mean is that like we should be encouraged. We can have these conversations with people. And were there times where people got a little bit hostile with me and a little upset when they kind of hashed out a little bit more about what I believed? Like, absolutely. But that wasn't the norm. And I think I was expecting it to be way more of a hostile environment, and it wasn't that bad. And obviously that was 2015. 2016 to 18, things have progressed a lot. Things are a little more intense. And I think people who oppose the gospel are a little more emboldened these days. And so that could be different, but I would imagine you could still have the same conversations with people.
I want to pause there for a second because as you were talking earlier, one of the things that so many Christians wrestle with, and this can be just in general in sharing faith with anyone, but certainly when it comes to the LGBT world, maybe the only one that they know that's gay or whatever, or trans, or, is putting on that identity is maybe their son or their daughter or a family member. And of course, that has its own dynamics that's much broader than just the LGBT, experience or whatever. But talking to somebody you don't really know, I think for so many Christians, the idea feels like what you just described, that it's only going to be antagonistic. I'm going to have to, like, we're thinking of, what do I do from hello to praying the sinner's prayer with them and everything in between? And we're like, I can't begin to do any of that. And so we just don't do anything. And rather than doing what you're talking about, which again, I think you found the Lord just equipped you in some really basic and simple things, but brilliant things of just being able to thread the needle and just ask a question. I mean, that idea of just saying to somebody, hey, you know what? I mean, honestly, I'm a Christian, but I don't think that the church has had really great communication with the LGBT community and or something along that line. I'd love to hear your story. I mean, that's such a non-threatening way of going, pretty deep, pretty quickly to hear where someone's been. And it also really tenderizes, frankly, it's you're hearing their story. And the goal should be, a desire should be to see this person come into the kingdom, but also the Christian's heart is actually going to be tenderized as they hear not just
100%.
Not just lumping LGBT to a population of people, but actually hearing the stories of heartbreak and the problem, often connected to trauma, whatever, often connected to rejection by the church and other Christians, all those kinds of things. So, I mean, I'm reminded of what, I never get this quite right, but Bill Bright talked about, the founder of Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ, talked about this idea of sharing the gospel and leaving the results with God, basically. And I think we have to become much more willing and adept to know that, look, I'm going to share, but if that person wants to walk away, they can walk away. But at least I've planted something that maybe will take fruit in another conversation with somebody else.
Yeah. So the Bill Bright quote is great because a lot of our interactions were one-time interactions. We'd meet somebody once, talk with them for an hour or so, and then we wouldn't see them again. There were other times, though, where we made very real, meaningful friendships with some people, and there are some that I'm still in contact with today. And when I go back to New York City, try to see at least one particular guy I know of that I still see him when I go back to New York City. And he's a gay identified guy who's in his mid 60s now, and we agree on very few things, but we love each other, and we'll go have dinner together whenever I go back to New York City. Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, it's been so great to be with you and just to kind of get caught up with you. I'm so glad that our audience also had a chance to hear your story, your amazing story, God's amazing story in your life, and also just some of the incredible things he's led you into in New York City. And also for those, if you've really enjoyed this conversation with Ryan and hearing more of his story, we're going to do another round of this because there are some details and some things I want to get into that I think you'll find fascinating with some of the particular ways that God has led Ryan in ministry. And I think you'll again really want to tune in for round 2 here. So again, Ryan, thank you for being here with us. Really appreciate that. We so appreciate the time you've just invested with us in our Transforming Congregations podcast. To join us for future podcasts, dial into transformingcongregations.org/podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.